I never believed in the supernatural, not in ghosts or spirits or things that go bump in the night. My world was one of tangible things, the solid feel of an axe handle, the scent of pine in the mountain air, the ache in my bones when a storm was coming, but that all changed in the autumn. I lost my entire world. My daughter, my only child, and her husband died in a head-on collision on a rain-slicked mountain road. In the space of a single screeching moment of metal and glass, I was suddenly alone with their infant daughter. Just me, a grandfather of 61 with nothing but a meager social security check, living in a cabin at the very base of the mountains where civilization gave up. I was drowning in mourning and had no clue how I was going to survive, let alone raise a child. But something else, something beyond all comprehension, had different plans for us. This is what took place. It was a bleak October when they perished. The crash happened on a wet, treacherous curve just outside of the valley. One moment, my daughter was driving her family home from a Sunday visit with me, the car filled with the scent of the apple pie she'd baked, and the next moment, a delivery van hydroplaned and crossed directly into their lane. The state patrol, a young man with eyes that held far too much pity, told me they died on impact. He said it as if it was meant to be some kind of consolation, a small mercy in an ocean of cruelty. The infant, my granddaughter, survived because she was in the rear seat, facing backward in her safety seat, cocooned from the violence. She was only 7 months old, too young to comprehend that her parents were a memory, too young to know anything except that the universe had suddenly become a darker, colder, emptier place. Child Protective Services, a woman with a tired face and a stack of forms, asked if I could take her. Of course I said yes. What else could I possibly say? She was my granddaughter, my flesh and blood, the last piece of my daughter left on this earth. But agreeing to take her and knowing how to manage it were two completely different things. I had raised my daughter, but that was 35 years ago, when I was a young man and my wife, God rest her soul, was still living. Now I was alone, surviving on a fixed income in a cabin that needed repairs I couldn't possibly pay for. The ancient furnace clanked and wheezed, barely functioning. The windows let in drafts whenever the wind blew, and winter was stalking us, its icy breath already creeping down from the peaks. My cabin sat at the very end of the line, where the maintained county road ended and the true wilderness began. Most people stayed away from this area. They said it was too remote, too far from the conveniences of town. But I had lived here for 45 years and had never experienced any real trouble. The mountains had always felt like a quiet, sheltering companion to me. I never imagined they would become something more. The first weeks after the infant, my little Lily, came to live with me were the most difficult of my entire existence. Every night, after she finally drifted into a fitful sleep, I wept. I sat in my worn armchair in the dark, the silence of the cabin amplifying my sorrow, and I wept for my daughter, for her husband, for the life this perfect infant would never have with her parents. I wept because I was terrified. Terrified I wouldn't have enough money for diapers and formula. Terrified I wouldn't have the energy to do this alone. Terrified I would disappoint her, the way I felt like I had disappointed everyone else in my life. November came and brought the first serious cold. The temperature plummeted below freezing and remained there, a stubborn, unyielding frost that settled deep into the ground. My heating bill doubled, then tripled. I started wearing 4 layers of clothing inside the cabin and keeping Lily wrapped in a cocoon of blankets. I fed her the bottles, changed her diapers, and attempted to make her smile. But inside, I was suffocating. The grief was a physical weight, destroying me from the inside out, and the terror of not having enough was even worse. Then came the night that transformed everything. It was 3 weeks before Christmas. A relentless freezing sleet was coming down. and the wind was screaming through the gaps in my old windows like a banshee. I had just put Lily to bed when I heard something outside. At first, I dismissed it as the wind knocking a loose limb against the side of the cabin, but then I heard it again. A heavy thump, then another, followed by the distinct sound of footsteps crunching through the ice-crusted snow. My heart began to race. We were 2 miles from the nearest neighbor. Nobody ever came out here after dark, especially not in a storm like this. I thought maybe it was an animal, a mountain lion or a bear driven down from the high country in search of food. But the footsteps sounded too heavy, too purposeful. They sounded almost like a person. I crept to the main room window and pulled back the heavy wool curtain just a fraction of an inch. What I saw made my blood freeze in my veins. There was something standing in my yard, something enormous. It was at least 9 feet tall, a hulking silhouette against the swirling sleet, covered in dark, shaggy fur. Its shoulders were as wide as my refrigerator. It was a Bigfoot, standing perfectly motionless in the storm, just staring at my cabin. Its eyes caught the weak light from my porch lamp and reflected back with a faint, eerie glow, the way an animal's eyes do at night. But this was no animal, not any animal I had ever seen or read about. I stumbled back from the window, pressing my hand over my mouth to stifle a cry. My mind was spinning, a chaotic whirlwind of disbelief and terror. Was I seeing things? Was I so exhausted and grief-stricken that I was having hallucinations? But no, the Bigfoot was real. I could see the sleet settling on its matted fur. I could see the faint plume of its breath as its chest rose and fell. I ran to Lily's room and closed the door as quietly as I could. She was still sleeping, her little chest rising and falling in a peaceful, innocent rhythm. I stood there in the dark, listening to my own heartbeat thunder in my ears. Outside, I could hear the Bigfoot moving around the cabin. I heard its heavy tread along the side of the building. I heard it stop at the back entrance. I heard the door handle rattle, a metallic jiggle that sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I fumbled for my phone to call for help, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped it. By the time I picked it up again, the sound had stopped. The Bigfoot had gone silent. I stood frozen in the dark, waiting for something to happen, waiting for the door to burst open or a window to shatter. But nothing happened. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 minutes, I finally worked up the nerve to look outside again. The Bigfoot was gone. The only evidence it had been there at all was a set of massive footprints in the ice, leading from the deep woods to my cabin and back again. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat in a chair next to Lily's crib with an old hunting knife in my lap, jumping at every creak of the cabin and every howl of the wind. By morning, I had almost convinced myself it must have been a bear. Bears sometimes walked on their hind legs. Maybe in the dark and the sleet, my frightened, exhausted mind had turned an ordinary bear into something impossible. But when the sun came up, casting a pale, watery light over the frozen landscape, I went outside to look at those footprints. They were not bear tracks. They were shaped like enormous human footprints, but 4 times the size, and they led right up to my back entrance, stopped there for a while, and then returned to the mountains in a straight, purposeful line. That morning I found something else too. On my back porch, arranged carefully on the top step, was a pile of provisions. Not garbage or scraps, but real, edible food. There were wild mushrooms, still fresh despite the cold, arranged in a neat cluster. Next to them were 4 large trout, cleaned and gutted, laid out on a bed of fragrant pine needles. The Bigfoot had left them there during the night. I stood there, staring at that food for a long time, trying to make sense of it. This creature, whatever it was, had terrified me. But it hadn't tried to harm me. Instead, the Bigfoot had brought me provisions. Why? I looked at those trout and mushrooms and thought about my empty refrigerator. I thought about how I'd been stretching every dollar, skipping meals so I could afford formula for Lily. I thought about how scared I had been that we wouldn't make it through the winter. I took the provisions inside. The trout was fresh, the mushrooms were earthy, and I cooked them both for breakfast. I felt guilty about it at first, like I was accepting charity from something I should be afraid of. But I was hungry, and I was desperate, and the food was good. That night, the Bigfoot came back. I was expecting it this time, so I wasn't as afraid. I heard the familiar crunch of footsteps in the ice and went to the window. The Bigfoot was standing in the same spot as before, just watching my cabin. This time, with the storm past and a full moon casting a silver glow on the snow, I got a better look at the creature. It was massive, with long, powerful arms that hung almost to its knees and a broad, muscular build. Its fur was dark brown, almost black in the moonlight, and its face was a strange, compelling mixture of human and ape, with a flat nose and deep-set eyes that seemed intelligent, aware. The Bigfoot stood there for maybe 15 minutes, then turned and walked silently back into the mountains. In the morning, there was more food on my porch, more mushrooms, more trout, and this time a wild turkey, already cleaned and ready to cook. This continued for weeks. Every night, the Bigfoot would come and stand in my yard. Every morning, I would find food on my porch. I stopped being afraid and started being curious. Who was this creature? What did it want? Why was it helping me? I started leaving my own offerings on the porch. Nothing big, just things I thought the creature might like. A jar of honey, some bread I had baked, a thick wool blanket I no longer used. Every morning my offerings were gone and there was new food in their place. It became a silent routine, a strange, unspoken exchange between us. I would put something out and the Bigfoot would take it and leave something else. We were communicating without words, building a relationship based on gifts and gestures. My granddaughter was growing during this time. Lily was crawling now, pulling herself up on furniture, making those happy baby sounds that almost sound like words. She had my daughter's eyes, that same bright intelligence, that same endless curiosity about everything. Watching her grow was both painful and beautiful. Painful because my daughter would never see it, and beautiful because this little girl was thriving, despite everything. I was spending less time grieving and more time just trying to keep up with her. Babies don't care about your sadness. They need to be fed and changed and entertained and loved. She pulled me forward when all I wanted to do was collapse backward into my sorrow. She gave me a reason to keep going when I had none, and the Bigfoot kept us alive. Without the food the creature brought, I don't know what would have happened. My social security check barely covered the heating bill and the property taxes. There was nothing left for groceries. But every morning there was food on my porch. Fish and game and wild plants, more than enough to keep us fed. I learned how to prepare things I had never cooked before. I learned which wild plants were edible and which weren't. I learned to preserve food for lean times, to smoke meat and dry herbs. The Bigfoot was teaching me to survive in ways I never had to before. Then winter came in full force. The snow started falling in December and didn't stop until March. We were buried under several feet of it. The road to the valley was impassable for weeks at a time. The mail carrier couldn't get through. The propane delivery truck couldn't get through. We were completely cut off from civilization, but we weren't alone. Every morning, I would wake up to find that someone had shoveled a path from my door to the woodshed. Every morning there was fresh firewood stacked neatly on the porch. Every morning there was food. The Bigfoot was taking care of us, making sure we had everything we needed to survive the brutal winter. I never saw the creature during the day. It only came at night, but I could feel its presence, a constant watchful energy at the edge of the tree line. Sometimes I would look out the window and see movement in the shadows. Sometimes I would hear branches snapping under an enormous weight. Sometimes I would find massive tracks in the snow leading right up to my windows, as if the Bigfoot had been standing there looking in at us. I should have been frightened by that, but I wasn't. The creature had proven itself to be a protector, not a threat. It was watching over us, making sure we were safe. And in that brutal winter, when we were so isolated and vulnerable, that protection meant everything. One night in January, during the worst blizzard I had ever seen, something happened that changed my understanding of the Bigfoot completely. The wind was so violent that I was afraid my little cabin would collapse. The temperature had dropped to 20 below zero. Lily was crying because she was cold, despite all the blankets I had wrapped her in. The fire in the wood stove was roaring, but it couldn't keep up with the bitter cold seeping through the walls. I was genuinely terrified that we wouldn't survive the night. Then I heard something on the roof, heavy footsteps moving carefully across the shingles. The Bigfoot was up there doing something. I heard scraping sounds, thumping sounds, and then everything went quiet. When morning came and the storm had finally passed, I went outside to see what had happened. The Bigfoot had covered my entire roof with a thick layer of pine boughs, creating an insulation layer that trapped the heat inside. The creature had also piled snow high around the base of the cabin, creating a natural windbreak that blocked the worst of the cold. That night, our cabin had been warmer than it had been in weeks. The Bigfoot had literally saved our lives. After that night, I started talking to the creature. I knew it was out there in the darkness, watching and listening. So I would stand on my porch and speak into the night, telling the Bigfoot about my day, about Lily's progress, about my fears and my hopes. I didn't know if the creature understood my words, but I needed to acknowledge what it was doing for us. I needed to express my gratitude, and sometimes, just sometimes, I would hear a response. Not words, but sounds. A low, rumbling call from deep in the mountains, a branch breaking in a specific rhythm, a pattern of knocks on a distant tree. The Bigfoot was communicating back, in its own way. We were building a relationship, the creature and I, not a human relationship, but something else, something primal and honest and based on mutual care. The Bigfoot protected us and provided for us. I acknowledged the creature and treated it with respect. That was our bond. Spring came eventually, as it always does. The snow melted, and the road to the valley opened again. People could get through now, the mail carrier, the propane delivery man, neighbors checking to see if we had survived. They were amazed that we had made it through such a brutal winter all alone. They asked how I had managed it, an old man with an infant in a remote cabin. I just smiled and said we got lucky. I didn't tell them about the Bigfoot. I knew instinctively that the creature needed to remain a secret. If people knew about it, they would come looking, hunters and scientists and curiosity seekers. They would invade these mountains and they would destroy the peace that the Bigfoot needed to survive. So I kept quiet. My granddaughter was a year old now, taking her first wobbly steps, saying her first words. She was healthy and happy despite the hardship we had endured. And she knew the Bigfoot. She had seen it through the windows enough times that she recognized it. When the creature would appear at the tree line in the evening, she would point her chubby little finger and make an excited sound. She wasn't afraid. The Bigfoot was just part of her world, as normal to her as the mountains or the trees. The Bigfoot continued to visit us through the spring and summer. The pattern was different now. The creature didn't come every night anymore, and it didn't always leave food. We had other sources now that the road was open, but the Bigfoot still checked on us regularly, still made sure we were safe. Sometimes I would find gifts that weren't food. Beautiful, smooth stones arranged in patterns, feathers from rare birds. Once, a carved wooden figure that looked almost like a toy. I gave that to Lily, and it became her favorite thing. She carried it everywhere, a tangible link to her silent guardian. As the months passed, I learned more about the creature through observation. I learned that it was intelligent, far more intelligent than any animal I had ever encountered. The Bigfoot understood cause and effect. It understood our needs and anticipated them. I also learned that it was patient, strong beyond belief, and incredibly gentle. Despite its enormous size and strength, The Bigfoot moved carefully around our cabin, never damaging anything, never making more noise than necessary, and I learned that it was lonely. I could see it in the way the creature lingered sometimes, standing at the tree line for hours just watching us. I could hear it in the long, mournful calls it made into the night. The Bigfoot was alone in these mountains, just as I had been alone before it appeared. Maybe that was part of why it had chosen to help us. Maybe it recognized in us a reflection of its own solitude. That summer, something happened that made me understand just how much we depended on the Bigfoot's protection. A group of hikers got lost and ended up near my cabin. They were young men who saw Lily playing in the yard and an old man alone, and they decided to take advantage. They pushed their way inside, demanding food and taking what they wanted. One of them made a comment about how no one would ever know if something happened to us out here. I was terrified, but then they heard something outside, a sound so deep and loud that it rattled the windows. The Bigfoot had arrived, and it was angry. The hikers ran to the window and saw the creature standing in the yard, 9 feet of fur and muscle and pure rage. The Bigfoot roared again and took a step toward the cabin. Those young men ran like I had never seen anyone run before. The Bigfoot watched them go, and then it turned to look at me through the window. I nodded to the creature, a gesture of thanks. The Bigfoot nodded back, a very human gesture from something that wasn't human at all, and then it disappeared back into the trees. I reported the incident, but didn't mention the Bigfoot. The police found the men, babbling about a monster. Everyone assumed they were on drugs. But I knew the truth. The Bigfoot had saved us again. My granddaughter was 2 years old now, running and talking. She had a name for the creature, her baby version of the word that came out sounding like Big. Every evening she would stand at the window and call for Big, waving her little hand. And most evenings, the Bigfoot would appear at the tree line and wave back. I saw it with my own eyes, night after night. The creature was bonded to us, especially to her. It was watching over her childhood, making sure she grew up safe and loved. I was 64 now, and the years of grief and stress had taken their toll. There were days when I wondered how much longer I could keep this up. But then I would see the Bigfoot standing watch at the tree line, and I would remember that I wasn't really doing this alone. That winter, our second with the Bigfoot, was easier. I knew what to expect. This time the creature started bringing different kinds of gifts, medicinal plants that helped with my aching joints, special mosses that were good for treating cuts. The Bigfoot seemed to understand that I was getting older and needed different kinds of help now. My granddaughter turned 3 that spring. She talked about Big constantly, telling me stories about what the Bigfoot did during the day. She said Big lived in a cave high up in the mountains. She said Big was sad sometimes because it missed its family. I didn't know if these things were true, but they felt true. That summer I decided to thank the Bigfoot properly. I took one of my old wool coats and spent weeks modifying it, making it much larger to fit the creature's enormous frame. When it was finished, I left it on the porch with a note that just said, "Thank you." The next morning, the coat was gone, and that night, when the Bigfoot appeared at the tree line, it was wearing the coat. The creature stood there in the moonlight and raised one massive hand in what could only be described as a salute. I felt tears running down my face. The years continued to pass. My granddaughter grew into a young child. She understood that our situation was unusual, that Big was a secret we needed to protect. I started writing things down, documenting our impossible relationship for her to have when she was older. I was 68 years old now, and the Bigfoot seemed to understand I was aging. The creature started doing more around the property, repairing fences, clearing fallen trees, doing the heavy lifting I could no longer manage. We were a team, the 3 of us, an old man, a young girl, and a creature from legend. One evening that fall, something extraordinary happened. The Bigfoot emerged from the tree line and walked toward Lily. As she played in the yard, the creature knelt down, making itself smaller, and reached out one massive hand to gently touch the top of her head. She reached up and touched its hand in return. They stayed like that for a moment, connected. The barrier between species had dissolved. As I write this now, it has been almost 9 years since that first sleety night. 9 years of daily miracles and impossible friendship. Lily is 9 years old, healthy and happy. I am 70, still here, still able to care for her. And the Bigfoot is still here, still watching over us. Last winter, the creature brought us another gift. A carved wooden figure, larger and more elaborate than the first. It was a sculpture of 3 figures standing together, one large, one medium, one small. The Bigfoot, me and my granddaughter standing between us, her hand reaching up to touch us both. The Bigfoot had created a sculpture of our family. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know how many more years I have left, but I know this much. We have been given an extraordinary gift. We have been allowed to see beyond the normal boundaries of the world. We have experienced a connection that transcends species and logic, and we are grateful beyond words. Every evening, Lily still stands at the window and watches for Big. And every evening our guardian appears, a constant, silent promise that we are not alone. This is our story, our truth, the miracle that saved us.